So now we're on item number 6. Mr. Bartow, next presentation.
Thank you. Item number 6 arises out of a very sort of a very hopeful and focused recommendation from a group of stakeholders referred to as the Retirement Coalition. And there are two issues that were really raised in that recommendation. One is additional notice on items that are, of special importance that are going to be considered, and then the other item is sort of a transparency on the costs of additional information requests. So you'll see the letter is attached. In my staff prepared for you, what we thought would perhaps where it would fit in the board policy manual under agendas, because these are really agenda issues. And so what you have is a draft before you of our language, certainly not wedded to any part of it, but we're trying to address and see where it fit appropriately. Since the item was prepared and provided, there, I've received some comments from board members about possible revisions. But also, I think that there's a significant amount of input that our fiduciary council or your fiduciary council wants to provide on the entire discussion of the issue. And your board governance council may also, or advisor may also have, I believe she does have some input on that. So I really would like to open up the discussion rather than wordsmithing the item, the proposed language that I put out there. I think really we need to step back and address it conceptually. We've received this letter. We've received these recommendations or requests, and where does that fit in, and what sort of recommendation can we get from your outside consultants and your outside advisors? So hopefully that was
before
clear.
We hear from Ian, is there someone from the Retirement Coalition who might want to make a statement with respect to this proposal? I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to. I just want to give you the opportunity to do so.
She doesn't want. Maggie Ellis, Chair of CTA Retirement Committee. I am not officially part of that coalition as has written that letter. However, I do know that hearings are happening over at the Capitol right now that preclude a lot of them from being here. So, we always recognize the board's interest in being transparent, and we appreciate that. I think this body, both as staff and as a board, have risen to every expectation that the community you serve expects. I think this letter just addresses some additional issues that we would like to see put into play to make sure that as we move forward, we continue with that high level of transparency. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lanoff?
Well, as you all know, I mean, I've been here a long time, and can't really identify the problem that this is supposed to address. We've had meetings for years where board members have asked for additional information and felt totally free in doing that without any compunction, whether I agreed with it or not, or whether I thought it was necessary for due diligence. And the board, has always been able to look at what's being requested, and the board has always been able to address, whether the information that's being requested is appropriate and useful. So I really don't see the need for this kind of hamstringing of the board. I have two concerns. The first concern is that it might prevent board members from feeling fully comfortable in asking for additional information. And to me, that's creates some, some issues because that's the last thing I would ever want a board member to feel uncomfortable about. And the second thing is there's potentially built-in delay here, where sometimes delay is harmful to the system. This is going to require perhaps postponement of decisions where postponement is not necessarily in the interest of CalSTRS. I think that, again, is something that should be left to the discretion of the board. I mean, that's why you're fiduciaries. If you think that on a particular item, and I think this is sort of an item-by-item thing, there shouldn't be a general policy on this, you feel that there hasn't been enough transparency or there is a need for further study and something should be postponed. Through the years, I've never seen this board, and there have been a lot of different people I've seen up there. I've never seen board members not speak out and not, make it clear that there should be additional time, and then the board is in a position to consider what's before it. So I just don't. To me, this is a rigid imposition that could result in unnecessary and inappropriate hamstringing. So I'm, from a fiduciary perspective, I can't say that it would be a violation of fiduciary duty to adopt this, but there are, concerns that I have. It's possible to throw in language that says, on both proposals, as long as it's not in violation of fiduciary duty. But even that, to me, is just lip service and could result in board members, feeling constrained. So I would, not recommend this. I know this is a policy, issue, but I see legal implications, and it bothers me.
What is the current policy? What with respect to both of these items, how would these issues be resolved in the absence of these rules?
Well, Brian laid it out in the materials that you were given, but right now the board can decide when something's listed as an information item to move it up and make it an action item at the same meeting. And the board has done that from time to time, and I think that's a useful discretionary authority on the part of the board, where it's being told by either its experts on staff or outside experts that something needs to be done expeditiously. In terms of asking for information, there's no rule like a $10,000 rule. Ordinarily, in my experience, if someone asks for information, the staff, will be asked to give some kind of estimate at that meeting as to what it might cost, or whether it might interfere unduly with their carrying out of their duties, to have to put together this information or seek this information. So it's pretty much, in my experience, been done on the spot, without this sort of, to me, suggests a cost-benefit analysis every time a board member asks for information. And I'm not an enemy of cost-benefit analysis. It wouldn't be suitable for fiduciary counsel to be an enemy of cost-benefit analysis. But I don't think every time information is sought by a board member, we need to have this kind of cumbersome procedure. When I worked at the government, I used to have to deal with the OMB and the Carter administration. And despite the fact that he was a Democrat, it was a very conservative administration. And they were very, drove me crazy when I was trying to get out regulations or rulings, cost benefit, kept throwing things back. And I just am not a big fan of overdoing it. And I think this kind of proposal overdoes it.
As I read the current set of rules, I agree with your assessment, but even more specifically, aren't both of these issues, the setting of the agenda, the timing of items, and even the cost-benefit analysis of different things. Pretty much in the first instance, within the discretion or of the board chair.
Well,
So
I think that's correct, but yeah, go ahead, Brent.
Yes, that, it's within the board chair and then subsequently the discretion of the committee chair for a particular committee. And that is sort of, that's in, under that section on agendas, it is sort of it's intended to address sort of a workflow issue, how to get things before committees, how to get them addressed. And also it's limited, or it's circumscribed by Bagley-Keene or open meeting laws, which talk about the requirements for notice and providing information to the public. And of course, then the larger circle then, of course, is the fiduciary duty, business judgment or prudent judgment rule. And so there is a whole universe that does touch on these two particular suggestions or these two particular requests. And, you know, I see the input from your fiduciary council, and I really would like your board governance consultant as well. I see those as crucial to your decision-making on how to deal with this.
So before we hear from Ms. Williams, I guess, to sum up how I saw these proposals, in the first instance, kind of necessarily limit the discretion of the board chair or the committee chairs.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And then so then what happens is if we try to put this into our policy, then we have to work within those confines and create something, and then have sort of notwithstanding, or we have to have all these additional considerations, some of which Ian mentioned. But
So for example, with respect to the first item, the timing of taking action on items, how would that, if that policy were in place, how would you envision that being applied to, say, the board's decision to initiate derivative action against Walmart?
well, there are two things there. First of all, it is, you know, is this a major policy decision? Because it's, you know, right now that's a request. I could quickly say, deciding to sue the world's
Well, it
largest
says major policy or controversial items.
or controversial items. So I could see how that could fall within that particular ambit. But the other question is timing. So if you would look at this and try to apply this, you would say, okay, how is this sort of requiring an informational item followed by an action item? How is this?
Well, actually, there's, I'm sorry, I apologize. Go ahead. Let me not-
Tee it up for an informational item and then come back to the next board meeting and take action on it. So it really is, to repeat what Ian said, it really is a question of timing, your ability to make a decision. If the decision by the board or the committee chair is, hey, let's kind of wait on this, even though it's not specifically in there. There's nothing that prohibits, and this board does it all the time, to say, yeah, this is an action item, but bring it back to us. We need more information. So that's already within sort of your working ambit. Reducing it to a rule, the problem I have with that is saying, okay, if it's a major policy or it's controversial, you have to do it in this sequence, and of course you will not always be able to make that decision in that sequence. You may have to act now, and you've already sort of put yourself in the position to make that decision. You have to decide that you're not going to follow the policy, and then you're going to have to justify it as because the reason you're not following the policy is because it's inconsistent with your fiduciary duty. And as you've now layered on another very nuanced requirement to just take action.
And Brian and I, in that situation, would have to probably come up with an opinion that you could ignore this policy because it's your fiduciary duty to say to vote on that, intervening or filing in that particular lawsuit. And that then we create something, a document, and we, put the board in a position where someone could challenge our opinion and you're relying on our opinion. It just creates a whole set of complications. And the more I think about it, I keep thinking of more. I mean, I just don't see where this is something that's, that's consistent with prudence.
Actually, I don't have anything to add to what's already been said.
Any other comments from? Sharon, your finger's a little bit quicker than everybody else.
Is it? All right. I should be on a game show. I feel torn in this conversation because, I respect folks on Retirement Coalition because they represent our stakeholders, and I certainly believe that our board wants to do all we can to kind of have transparency, and so I feel a bit torn because I hear Ian's comments, and I wrestle with maybe less so with members feeling uncomfortable, because my sense is our board feels quite comfortable to ask for items, but is more around the timing issue and the built-in delay piece. And so I guess I'm just wondering, is there a compromise? Is there a way to maybe address some of the concerns around cost and process, but also still give us freedom to make decisions quickly if needed? I mean, is there a way to address some of the concerns from the coalition, but also not to be
through the
hamstrung?
years, there have been occasions where something's been listed as an information item, and then one of the board members or more will move that it be considered an action item, and then the board has a discussion of whether it should be an action item. I mean, to me, that takes care of the problem. But it should be done on a case-by-case basis. And if a majority of the board is uncomfortable with, arguably the lack of transparency on a particular issue because it's listed as information and then all of a sudden it's being proposed that it become action, a majority of the board could do something about it. They could just say, no, this has to wait till the next meeting. To me, that's the way it should work.
And in fact, doesn't the board chair have the discretion, even in the absence of a majority of the board members wanting to take it up as an action item, she controls the agenda?
Meaning?
Committee chairs also.
Committee chairs also.
Yes, committee chairs also. And the other part I wanted to add that's sort of outside the fiduciary consideration is the public meeting law Bagley-Keene consideration. So all of our agenda materials, our agenda and our materials are provided to the public 10 days before the meeting. That's not just what we're going to be talking about, it's all the supporting material. So you do have that 10-day time for members of the public to look at. The difference between the instance you mentioned, Michael, about filing an action against Walmart was the first consideration is whether or not this fits in the exception to the notification provisions of Bagley-Keene. So that was the preliminary consideration. Can we add this to our agenda and decide it today? So that's the first sort of decision making that the board or the committee would make, and we see that in appeals quite a lot. Where we're under a statutory time frame, and we have to go in. The board has to, or the committee has to decide that this is of an urgent nature, and it does have to be added to our agenda, and therefore it doesn't necessarily comply with the Bagley-Keene prior notice. So there are a lot of instances where we do provide we have to provide under sunshine law for the open session stuff. We have to provide ahead of time. So there is a time period for interested members of the public to consider what information is before the committee or what action item is before the board or the committee, and then have time to comment on it and time to provide input. And one of the things that could happen is a member of the public could say, I don't think it's appropriate to take action until this particular item is further fleshed out, and then it's a decision again by the committee or the board, depending upon what meeting we're talking about. So that's why I said the Bagley-Keene rules kind of offer a lot of transparency and openness, and if they're followed correctly, this information should be out there. And so I do think that enters into the considerations of this discussion.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Thank you. Yeah, I come at this largely from the same direction as Ian. It seems to me that in carrying out our responsibilities, that we really have to be able to get the information that we think we need. And I think each individual board member should be able to make the decision as to what the information is that he or she needs. It shouldn't be a group decision. We're 12, well, if we were fully constituted, we would be 12 different people coming from different perspectives who each needs to carry out his or her own fiduciary responsibility. At some point, in theory, it could be a problem where we would be spending too much money on information requests. In the time I've been on this board, which is I don't call myself a new board member anymore. It's been almost a year and a half.
15 months?
I've never seen that problem arise. If it were to arise, I would expect that staff might raise that question, and we could address it as need be. But to put it into policy, so that there has to be an assessment of the cost every time, I don't really see that's useful. So I have a couple of questions. First of all, because this is all, while it's written more broadly, it's basically about information requests. So the discussion, the idea that any major policy or controversial items, and I'm particularly focused on controversial items, have to be informational and scheduled for action at the next regularly scheduled board or committee meeting. Is it possible that an information request could be a controversial item?
Yeah. Yes.
I think that's one of the reasons that the letter has been presented to you.
Now,
So,
okay,
yes.
so I don't see how a request for information can be a controversial item. Information is, it may be information that some board member doesn't feel is useful to his or her decision making, but information in and of itself is just that. It's information. Why do we think that there's ever a situation in which information can be a controversial item? So I would suggest, if we go in this direction, which I don't think it's necessary, that we take that out, or that we say that an information request can never be controversial. I can see that not all of my fellow board members agree with that, but that being said, I think that getting back to our fiduciary duty, the ability to ask for information should not be impaired by policy or by other board members. Second, as I read this, and now I'm looking on page 3, information requests.
Is that
INV
62, 61.
59, so page 3 of the,
Okay.
I'm sorry, of the.
It's good.
Information requests by individual board or committee members should be discussed during the discussion of the applicable agenda item or during the summary of information requests agenda item. So if any board member has a question about an agenda item, we got our board packet, 10 days ago, we read the board packet. We have a question about any of those agenda items. As I read this, we can't call up Brian or Jack or Chris or Ed and ask a question. Because any information request has to be raised when that issue comes up at the board meeting. And then the information doesn't necessarily have to be provided at that meeting, but we've agendized action on that item at that meeting. So it's a completely, seems to me, unworkable situation for board members getting information to take action on, as well as the efficiency of the board. Just, you know, there's efficiency to my making a request of Ed and getting an answer in advance. And many times board members will make requests for information, and staff will decide that the answer should be sent to all board members, and that's fine too. But the whole point here seems to me to be that this proposed policy reins in the inquiry that this board should have the freedom to engage in. And I don't understand the reason for it. I don't believe information is ever dangerous. I think information may be irrelevant, may be deemed to be not on point, but I don't know why we would ever be afraid of information. And if we believe there's a problem with cost, maybe that we can provide some guidance as opposed to a strict policy that says, you know, if staff deems that it's an excessive cost and questions whether it's essential to the operation of the board, then there's a way to raise that with the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Ms. Dillon?
Alrighty, I hope this comes out how I want it to come out, but after being up for several hours, I'm not quite sure it will. Except for very, very rare circumstances where we've not had the luxury of time, we have actually done this. When we have major policy, when we have controversial items, we take our time and go through that. In most recent history, we've had some policy items that we've been working on for quite a while. We're on a third, fourth, or maybe even a fifth reading. So I think that I give Brian kudos for trying to make this as broad as he possibly could, but there are restrictions within this that I think are untenable for the board. And I'm just speaking to number one. Having an informational item presented and then having to take action at the next meeting, that doesn't work for us. Subsequent meetings, yes, but not necessarily the next one. And if there's ever a time crunch, I think you've given us the leeway to do it, but we need to have that leeway, and that leeway needs to be very clear. As for information requests, I think it's the responsibility of every board member that when we make information requests, that we consider the time and the resources that it's going to take to process those requests. We've been pretty good, the members at the dais now, but I know that we've had members in the past that have asked for information that have been costly, and because we're such a congenial group, we're okay with that, or we have been okay with that in the past. But that has cost time, and it has cost resources, and it's cost money. But I think it's imperative on us to have those conversations when we have a request from a board member that maybe the rest of us don't understand the direction, or we think that it's possibly a frivolous direction, or that the cost could be, or that we don't question the cost. And so when we have we're sitting here, we're doing something with Ed, and we say, Ed, can you do this for us? And he's gonna tell us, you know, I can do that and have it for you tomorrow. That's not something that we should have to vet. We ask Ed to ask Milliman to do a study. We don't know what it's gonna cost, but that should be a conversation that starts with us, not necessarily with staff. And I think that when we make those information requests, that we need to consider, is that the direction that the body wants to go in? And this just, it's more than just information from one person to make up their mind about a certain issue. And that we have those conversations. So I think it's incumbent on us and every committee member, every board member. That said, I think that there's times that we forget that we have that responsibility. So putting that responsibility, however broadly, in a board policy manual, I'm okay with. But I don't want it to be so prescriptive that it hamstrings us. I don't want it to be so prescriptive that it constrains our time that we need to take to make our decisions. And the last thing I would say is you know, Brian mentioned it, but we are very open to our stakeholder groups and having them speak to us during our board items. I think that part of their job also is to have that interaction with us and to challenge us on our thinking. I think we have a pretty good way of doing this as long as we just do it. I don't think that it has to be so prescribed in a policy. The policy could reflect our responsibility, but not be so prescriptive. I hope that all made sense. It's been a long time since I've talked so long.
Very eloquent. Mr. McGuire?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to focus my comments on one item that actually Dana did bring up, and that is whenever a board member during a committee or full board meeting suggests that maybe a study is in order, almost every study is an information request. And it really is. It's to bring information back to the board. Almost everyone that involves a study is going to be over $10,000. Then I also have to ask the question that's related to something Paul brought up. What if it's a controversial study? Well, then I guess we need an information item for that, and then ultimately an action item. And if it's one of our committees instead of the board, it could be 9 months before you get actual action on that thing, that item. I agree with Dana that we've been, I think, tried to be efficient and transparent in all discussions and requests for information and board decisions. And I'm a little concerned that what's been presented is a little bit, sometimes too narrow, sometimes too broad. I think some of the information requests originate outside of committee and board meetings. So do we agendize those requests? Possibly. But that should be up to the chair of that committee. So those are my comments on the issue, and I question whether we need to put this in policy.
Thank you. Michelle?
All right, I don't think I'm going to say anything very different from what's already been said, but just on the first piece of items first introduced as information and then action, I think we're already covered by Bagley-Keene and our legal counsel on if we stray too far from something that's agendized to put it over to another time when it has been properly agendized. On the information requests, I agree that with a lot of the comments that, currently, at least this board makeup, we seem, the chair almost always sort of looks for consensus amongst the committee and or board members to, see that we all sort of agree on whether or not that is a good request going forward. And if we need to debate that, then I think that we need to debate that. But I don't know that we need a policy put in place to do that. So that's
Thank you. Ms. Hendricks?
Well, I did want to just highlight that I think we have had some robust dialogue about some information items in my tenure here, and I do think our board has actually strongly kind of directed that conversation. I think, you know, I do feel like our board is very engaged with one another, and because of the respect I think we have for one another, we're willing to disagree or bring up concerns that we have, and we have done that in my tenure on the board. So I guess, you know, in sort of chorus with Dana's comments, I would just say that I think it's, even the letter from the Retirement Coalition is a reminder for us of the diligence that we need to have on this board. I think we have that diligence, but it's a good reminder for us to be thoughtful about and mindful about the amount of the cost for some of our information requests. And I also think it is a challenge for our stakeholders. I know our stakeholders are very engaged, and I think we want to continue that engagement. And so for them to also know that they have a voice to speak up when they have concerns about actions that this board is taking, or so. But I guess I would concur at this point, given the comments about fiduciary duty, that perhaps the policy that's presented here, or the edits to the policy, would constrict our ability to operate in our full fiduciary duty. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Any other comments from members of the board, questions? Any other comments from staff on this? The consensus that I'm hearing is that we would reject the recommendation of staff on the theory that, as counsel has said, you know, it's kind of, it ain't broke, so why are we trying to fix it? On a personal level, I want to say that in reading our current policy, it really does come down to our faith in the judgment of the board chair, and in the case of committees, the committee chair. And as Paul has stated and Sharon has stated, I've been on this board for 15 months, and I cannot overstate the faith that I have in the judgment of our chair. And I see no reason to take any action to limit that. She is perfectly it is within her discretion to adopt the rules in the letter from the Retirement Coalition as a part of her decision-making matrix, as the same for the other board chairs, and in their discretion act accordingly. But I think it would be a mistake to kind of canonize these rules here. Do we need any action on this?
No.
Okay. Hearing none, I will close out this item. Any objections? Item number 6 is closed. We are now on review of information requests.
I would like to propose a study. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Oh, are there any before us?
We just have staff coming back with a couple things. On the gift policy, we're going to come back with a model, seems built around that $50 PERS limit, and include additional information on due diligence and some background on our investment practices. And then on the insider trading policy, we'll come back with a revised policy that will include potentially private markets, and then also include private personal gain and also gain of the system. And that's what I have coming back to the committee.
All in agreement on that list? Hearing no comment, thank you very much. Item number 8, draft agenda for the next committee meeting.
was gonna say, are there modifications based on our conversation?
Based upon changes, based upon your comments, I think we're probably, I'm probably gonna take a look at this. So obviously, we need to update this. I'd suggest that we bring it back for approval, at the beginning of the meeting, but if there's anything else that you think that we should add, we certainly will change this according to what has transpired today. So if there's anything else you need to add, otherwise we'll take care of that.
Adopted the presidential decision.
Yes.
Mhm. Yes, with edits.
So we'll take number 5 off the agenda for sure.
Yep.
And
And we'll
it does look like gift and insider trader coming back, yeah, so those look good for me.
And we'll take Robert Carlin off too, even though we were hoping he would change his mind and come back from CalPERS. We've now substituted Jill, so, we're doing fine.
Okay. Any public comment? Hearing none. Entertain a motion to adjourn.